Today, on this Tuesday, we are entering the last weekly reset before 11.2.5 because on October the 7th is when the patch is going to launch. We're going to have our item level increased, and also technically on a side note, Legion Remix is also going to launch. So today we're going through a recap of the meta situation for specs in both the Raid and Mythic Plus to go over which specs you might want to start playing as we have reached halfway through this season. You know, imagine you have gotten bored in playing one of your characters. Perhaps you were playing a tank, you have finally decided you have took enough abuse and you want to go and play DPS. Maybe you are a returning player starting to get into the expansion before the release of Midnight, or maybe you want to start thinking about the character to play in Legion Remix to get to max level so that then you can play that character in this season. So let's have a recap on how specs have been doing so far in this season for both Mythic Plus and the Raid, just to see what would be your outlook, your chances of enjoying said specs if you were to try to play them. Now obviously this is not for the players who have already been playing specs, have no problems, are perfectly happy and fine playing the characters they are already playing, but rather for everyone who has been thinking either of starting to play a different spec or the ones who are just starting now to play in this season. So starting with the quick ones first are the healers, because the simple answer right now to play a new spec in this season is Resto Shaman and Resto Druid. When you have to put together both the Raid and Mythic Plus, right now the Raid is very even, it is very balanced. All of the 5 classes of healers can heal just fine. They are all pretty good in the Raid. We are not in a situation where any one of them is particularly super weak, where you would have even trouble actually finding a spot in a Raid. Now, I said the 5 classes, not the specs, because Discipline Priest is the spec that is behind the others, the other one though being Holy Priest, which is doing just fine. The reason why Resto Druid and Resto Shaman would be fine to play in the Raid, even though if you looked at the actual results, specs like Preservation Evoker and Mystery Monk are just healing for more right now, especially when it comes to the last bosses like Nexus King or Dimensius. You see an even larger gap, especially for Preservation Evoker, is the fact that these two are also the meta specs when it comes to Mythic Plus. So while they are doing just fine and they are nothing special in the Raid, they are definitely the two to-go specs to play in Mythic Plus. So as long as they are doing fine in the Raid, them being the premier choice in Mythic Plus makes it pretty simple. As I said, not that in the Raid the other classes of healers are bad at the moment. In fact, they are all matching the 2 Resto specs. It's just that their power in Mythic Plus makes them the optimal, the ideal choice at the moment. The discussion for tanks, it's just about the same. Because again, when you're talking about the Raid, you do have the least popular Raid tanks by quite a good amount, which is Guardian Druid. But then you have Vengeance, Blood DK, Prot Paladin and Brewmaster Monk, all quite popular, rising in popularity with by far the most popular, almost 30% ahead in popularity of the others being Prot Warrior. Now this is even better than what we just said about healers, because in this case Prot Warrior not only is the most popular tank in the Raid, it is also the most popular tank in Mythic Plus. Now, alongside Prot Warrior, right below, slightly below Prot Warrior, you also have Prot Paladin. We often check the popularity of the comps in Mythic Plus, and Prot Paladin is, alongside Prot Warrior, one of the 2 choices in Mythic Plus keys, and it is one of the 3 most played tanks in Mythic Plus as well. So you have for healers Resto Druid and Resto Shaman, and for tanks you have Prot Paladin and Prot Warrior. Slightly more dominant in the tanks case. The healers are kind of okay in the raid and very good in Mythic Plus, whereas the tanks are already the popular choice in the raid on top of being the popular choice in Mythic Plus. If you really wanted to go for the niche option, the hipster option, the fedora sporting, monocle wearing, cigar huffing, glass of brandy sipping kind of hipster, then you would go for Brewmaster Monk, who can find room in some of the melee comps in Mythic Plus while also being one of the more popular tanks in the raid. Now then you move on to the more popular of the roles, which is the DPS. Now, when it comes to DPS, there are some lucky coincidences, just like we mentioned some of the tanks being popular in the raid while they are already also popular in Mythic Plus. So obviously in this case we would have to look already at the first two, the top two results in the raid right now, which have been top two for a reasonable amount of time at this point. You can see the average results from Warcraft logs and they are at the top. The average results from Archon, they are also at the top. The average results from WoW Meta, and they are also at the top. So pretty much across the board, Arcane Mage and Frost DK have been the better performing specs in the raid. And guess which are the two more popular picks in Mythic Plus? That is also Arcane Mage and Frost Death Knight. Now this is worth highlighting because it's not really often that common. Last season, for example, you had Devastation, Marksmanship, Destruction, Survival, even Ret amongst the better, highest performing specs in the raid. Yet the meta was Unholy, Balance and Arcane Mage. So a completely different top 3 in Mythic Plus compared to what we had in the raid. In this season though, it is following the trend of the best raid specs also doing well in Mythic Plus. Now, after these two, you have more options, there is more room to be able to pick valuable and good specs in Mythic Plus that are not doing nearly as well in the raid or are, you know, average, okay, good, decent, but definitely not one of the top results. Like, for example, you have Havoc. Havoc Demon Hunter is doing very well right now. In Mythic Plus, they are a middling spec in the raid. One other spec that has been rising quite a bit in their popularity in Mythic Plus is Fury, which is already doing quite well in the raid. A couple of the niche picks not having nearly the same amount of success they have been having in the raid compared to Mythic Plus is Elemental and Destro. Those will be more focused on raid kind of performances and power compared to Mythic Plus. Meanwhile, in the same class, you will find two different sides of the same coin, because Marksmanship and BM have been living a bit of a different start of this season, because first it started very strongly in favor of Marksmanship, both in the raid and in Mythic Plus. Then Beast Mastery gained a significant buff to both their power and their Dark Ranger power, so they have been rising quite a lot in their performance in the raid and also in their performance in Mythic Plus. This is this ending reset of popular comps in Mythic Plus in high keys. You can see that BM has started popping up everywhere, even in 2 out of the 3 top comps, whether it was replacing Arcane in by far the most popular comp, or if it has been replacing Havoc instead of Arcane now in the 3rd most popular comp. It has risen up the ranks quite a lot at the moment in Mythic Plus, while still continuing to rise and doing very well in the raid. And considering Marksmanship was already doing quite well in the raid, you would even have 2 different options for performing in the raid, and even technically in Mythic Plus, since Marksmanship is not terrible either in there. Those would be your best possible options of specs to be going for right now, to start to play right now, to re-roll to right now. For healers, it's Resto Druid and Shaman. For tanks, it's Prot, Paladin and Warrior. And for DPS, it's Frost DK, Arcane Mage, Marksmanship and BM Hunter, Fury Warrior, Destrolock and Elemental Shaman. However, we do know there are always a reasonable amount of contrarians, you know, players who want to go against the grain, want to be the different ones, looking for some other alternative specs. Now, calling it alternative would be a bit of a stretch given its popularity at all times, but Havoc, as we mentioned, is doing average in the raid while doing very well in Mythic Plus. Now, how could you find some justification for going even lower than this though? For example, some players wanting to play specs like Devastation Evoker or even Augmentation Evoker, perhaps specs like Feral or Balance Druid, maybe any one of the 3 rogues or Shadow Priest or Red Paladin, if we had to find a good thing to say about this spec. So some encouraging comments. Imagine a player is quite stubborn and said, okay, I listened to all of this, however, I'm still hard set on wanting to try out Shadow Priest. Well, in that case, what would matter is that you enjoy the spec. Obviously, you would have trouble playing that kind of spec like Shadow Priest at high key levels. As you can see, it's not exactly gonna be easy to find room in groups trying to play Shadow Priest in high enough key levels. In the raid, you will also be reasonably middling. You have some bosses you can find good success in because they are tailored for your multi-dotting cleave playstyle like Araz or Soul Hunters, but even looking at the harder bosses like Nexus King and Dimensius, you're not really doing too well. Most of these other specs mentioned would be around this level, like Balance Druid, Devastation Evoker, all 3 of the rogue specs, and Red Paladin. You can expect to not be very high, very good, very powerful when it comes to the raid. You have some rooms. Some of the special specs right now could probably be 2 of the rogue specs and Feral Druid. Feral Druid, despite showing up in the total results as being terrible, at least it does retain some very good single target. So for example, if you look at a pure single target fight like Fractillus, you might show up at the bottom as a Feral Druid, but your single target damage is still very competitive. For the rogues, on the other hand, it would be the opposite. Here, for example, they are all towards the bottom in pure single target damage, as it's not really their specialty. They would be able to do much better on Dimensius. You can see on Dimensius both subtlety and assassination have much higher results. This is thanks to the phase 2 add portion with a lot of adds you can use for funnel and the burst window at the beginning of P3, especially for sub, so you would have some extra value there. And I guess we can also say that in terms of Mythic Plus, you would be able to find more room in groups, definitely more than the spec we mentioned like Shadow Priest or Devastation or Survival, for example, because you might be invited to be part of this melee physical damage kind of comp, so a comp that includes specs like Monk and Warrior and Rogue, even BM Hunter or possibly Druids like Feral Druid to do more physical damage or melee damage. So things like the Mystic Touch of the Monks plus the Battle Shout plus even maybe the Wind Fury buff of a Shaman Healer, the Mark of the Wild buff of the Druid can find some room in Mythic Plus, but we're still not talking about a very popular choice. So don't expect this to be your to-go way when trying to find a group for Mythic Plus. It's not going to be the standard, but you can find some groups trying to go for that. So this would be the specs to aim for if you were thinking about playing, if you were thinking about re-rolling to a spec right now, changing characters, playing a new character, either because you are coming back in the patch right now, or very simple, you have decided to play a new character right now in the season. These are the specs currently doing the best both in the raid and in Mythic Plus. And it is bound at this point to last quite a while, since our 11.2.5 patch is launching, yet it is launching without any kind of balance tuning for the specs, so we're not expecting anything major to change anytime soon in terms of the performance of the specs, since no balancing is planned at the very least for now. So this is what we have on this Tuesday, a recap on the situation on the season for the specs and how they have been doing so far and how they will continue to be doing in the near future for anyone who is or already was thinking about playing a new spec in Season 3. So for today, on this Tuesday, it is now time to leave each other. We're starting the goodbyes by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone else who has been supporting completely for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, food. I need food, and more importantly, I need meat. Lots of meat.